I made the original 3 videos of this series nearly 4 years ago, and I thought it was about time to update them. I think the quality of my videos has improved a lot since then, and I want all the videos in this series to match well with each other. So I took the same people I talked about in the old videos, deleted the ones less relevant to the 1920s, and revised and expanded the scripts. But enough of this boring intro, let's get into the video. The first person on this list is Robert Harron. Most of you have probably never heard his name before, and he would have been completely forgotten had he not been in a couple of famous movies. Harron was an early Hollywood actor who got his start as an office boy for Biograph Studios in New York City at the age of 14. Biograph director D.W. Griffith thought Harron had good looks and was charismatic enough for the pictures. This gave Harron the opportunity to work with the famous director as a prolific actor at Biograph. In the following years, he appeared in a number of Griffith films, most notably Birth of a Nation and Intolerance. Shortly after arriving in New York City from Los Angeles, Harron attended a disappointing film premiere of the latest Griffith film, Way Down East, on September 3, 1920. Afterwards, he went to his hotel room in the Hotel Seymour. He had just gotten dressed and was about to set out for his movie studio when he was taking some clothes out of a trunk and a gun fell to the floor and shot him in the chest. There was no one else with him in the room, so he called the manager of the hotel himself, and the manager rushed all the way up to Harron's room on the 9th floor. As Harron was first being attended to, he was smiling and joking through the pain, and reportedly said, through clenched teeth, "I'm in a devil of a fix. I've shot myself." Despite the hotel manager telling him that his condition was serious, Harron first requested that an ambulance not be called, and to have a local physician contacted instead. But no physician was available, so he finally consented to be taken by ambulance. Then, when the ambulance did arrive, Harron refused a stretcher, insisting on being taken down in a chair, but he was quickly talked out of it as he was bleeding profusely. He was then taken to Bellevue Hospital. Even though he was in critical condition, Harron was immediately arrested after first aid was administered. He was moved to the prison ward at Bellevue for violation of the Sullivan Act. This law made it illegal to possess a private firearm in New York City without a license. An acquaintance quickly paid the $500 bail to release Harron from police custody. The bullet seemed not to have hit any important organs, but Harron was still losing a lot of blood. He languished in the hospital for a few days before dying on September 5th, after being in critical condition continuously from the moment he arrived. He was only 27 years old. It's unclear why exactly Harron had a gun in the first place, one theory being that he had used it recently in a movie. Another account stated that Harron himself had said, while injured, that he had put the gun in his suitcase to take it away from his younger brother, and had forgotten that he had put it there when it fell out and discharged. As might be expected, there was public speculation and gossip about this incident, including theories that Harron was depressed about relationship struggles with actress Dorothy Gish and had committed suicide. Family and friends refuted this story in part because he was a practicing Catholic who regarded suicide as a sin. In the end, it was ruled an accidental death, and that is the most probable explanation. Harron died in between the filming and release of his last film, Coincidence, which was released the following year. This is cited as the first time that a film production company had to figure out how to deal with an actor's strange death before a posthumous film release, from a PR perspective, that is. The film being a comedy, however, the production company, Metro Pictures, did not emphasize his role so it wouldn't ruin the film's atmosphere, and it was released with little fanfare. Harron had only recently signed a contract with Metro, and Coincidence was his first and last movie with the company, and unfortunately, it is now a lost film. And it wouldn't be long before another film production company had to handle a very similar tragedy. Only hours after Robert Harron's death in New York, another fatal accident occurred that shook Hollywood from across the Atlantic. Olive Thomas started out as an artist model after winning a beauty contest in New York. She got married at the young age of 15 and got a divorce 4 years later. She then joined the Ziegfeld Follies in 1915 and had an affair with Florenz Ziegfeld before becoming an actress. She is now best known perhaps for her performance in the 1920 movie The Flapper, which was the first movie in the US to feature flappers by name. In early September 1920, Thomas and her husband, Jack Pickford, brother of actress Mary Pickford, were in Paris on a second honeymoon. Thomas was already planning to go back to Paris after this trip to appear in some stage plays. On September 5th, after a night of partying and a nice middle-of-the-night meal, the couple went back to their room in the Hotel Ritz in Paris a little before dawn. Intoxicated, Thomas accidentally drank a lethal dose of mercury chloride, probably thinking it was something else. The substance had been medicine for Jack to treat his syphilis, but it was topical and very toxic if ingested. The chemical burned her mouth on contact, and Thomas would have felt a burning sensation deep within her after swallowing it, causing immense pain. Thomas immediately realized that she had made a serious mistake, and screamed, "Oh my God," before collapsing. According to Pickford, he was in bed when it happened, and he caught her in his arms as she fell. Pickford called for a doctor, then said that he tried to induce vomiting to get the poison out. A doctor arrived and Thomas's stomach was pumped multiple times, but no progress was made. Thomas was then taken to the American hospital just outside of Paris. She lost her ability to see and speak, then her kidneys failed and she lapsed into a coma. The 25-year-old Thomas died on September 10, 1920, 5 days after drinking the poison, and those 5 days had been excruciating. Yet again, there was public speculation and gossip about the cause of her death. Some suggested foul play, and that Jack Pickford had poisoned her. This was because it was revealed that Pickford and Thomas's marriage had been on the rocks, and the trip to Paris had been an attempt to save it. Different accounts say that Thomas, drunk and tired, had thought that the little bottle contained either sleeping pills, prescription nerve tonic, or drinking water, but it's unclear which of these she thought it was. It was also reported that the bottle was clearly labeled, though the label had been in French, which she couldn't read. This incident and the wild speculation surrounding it was one of the earliest examples of a true Hollywood scandal, though it was a fairly small one, and media attention would soon turn to the much bigger Fatty Arbuckle scandal the following year. The most persistent of the wild rumors was that of, quote, cocaine orgies, which Pickford denied. Ultimately, Thomas's death was ruled accidental, and her funeral on September 29th received large media coverage. Her last film, Everybody's Sweetheart, was released posthumously less than a month after her death. The filming had already been completed when she died. Thomas's mother, apparently not doing well financially, sold off Olive's things at an auction. Olive Thomas remains a somewhat obscure actress, but you can watch her most famous movie, The Flapper, easily online. The next person was at the center of one of the most sensational events of the 1920s, an event that shook Hollywood to its very core, the Fatty Arbuckle scandal. In 1921, silent film actress Virginia Rappe was not very famous, but tragedy would soon change that. On September 5, 1921, in San Francisco, Rappe was invited by a man in film comedian Fatty Arbuckle's entourage when he saw her at another hotel near the St. Francis Hotel, where the Arbuckle group was staying for a party. Rappe accepted and went to their suite. From there, the details become a bit foggy, partly from the haze of drunkenness and partly from differing witness testimonies. According to Arbuckle, over the course of the night, Rappe became very intoxicated and began vomiting profusely and tore at her clothes. She was subdued and a doctor was called. After spending a few more days in the hotel room attended by a doctor, she was taken to a hospital where she died 4 days later on September 9th. Because of the mysterious circumstances of her death and the association with Arbuckle, who was a huge movie star in Hollywood at the time, it started a media frenzy. The man who performed the autopsy concluded that the cause of death was a ruptured bladder that was partly due to peritonitis. One often cited explanation is that she had been suffering from an untreated bladder infection for a long time, which was made worse when she drank alcohol. After drinking a lot, she experienced an intense burning pain, and this, coupled with the effects of intoxication, could have explained her strange behavior. And drinking to excess might have caused her bladder to rupture, leading to her death. However, the man who performed her autopsy also believed that the rupture of her bladder had been caused by, quote, some external force. The media and the public had their own theories. The murky, booze-soaked chronology of events made speculation very easy. And to add an extra layer to the case, one of the witnesses at the party, a woman named Maud Delmont, who had accompanied Rappe to the party, declared Arbuckle to be responsible for her death. But Delmont also had a history of blackmailing rich men under similar circumstances to the Arbuckle situation. She was ultimately deemed an unreliable witness. Those who believed Fatty Arbuckle was guilty of having his way with and murdering Rappe could easily claim that Arbuckle showed signs of wanting to save his own skin, and for that reason his testimony might be unreliable. The argument against Arbuckle said that, while forcing himself on her, his large body had crushed her bladder. I won't get into all the details about this or the other theories, but they range widely, some rather far-fetched, and nearly everything being very graphic, so I have to choose my words a bit carefully when talking about some of the details, or else this video has absolutely no chance of staying monetized. One of the stories involves Arbuckle putting a Coke bottle somewhere in Rappe. I think you can guess where. But that one is probably not true. Rappe's manager later testified, very embarrassed, that Arbuckle told him and others that he had put some ice in the same place as the alleged Coke bottle. Arbuckle's defense claimed that this had in fact been an attempt to help Rappe, and that the act had not been forceful. There are a lot of factors to consider, including her exact cause of death, but nothing has been conclusively proven, and probably too much time has passed to get a 100% correct answer. Key details in Arbuckle's story and his testimony changed in the course of the following trials, and this could have been due to his original malicious intent, or simply a misguided attempt to appear less suspicious and clear his name. The slew of gossipy articles written about the circumstances of Rappe's death only served to muddy the waters even more. Some details in these kinds of articles were completely made up or wildly speculative, but they satisfied a certain section of the public who had a morbid craving to read about all the lurid details, and they also gave moralists more ammunition to rail against the immorality of Hollywood. At the trials, there were a lot of differing opinions, many of them reaching hyperbolic proportions. Witnesses chosen by the prosecution and the defense painted very different pictures of the two parties involved. The prosecution tried to demonize Arbuckle as a monster disguised as a jolly comedian. The defense attacked Rappe's character and tried to portray her as a loose woman. It was very ugly all around. The case was one of the biggest media frenzies of the decade, and the first to cause real damage to Hollywood's reputation. The pressure was so severe that Hollywood imposed censorship on itself in order to improve its standing with those who expressed moral outrage at the Fatty Arbuckle Virginia Rappe case and avoid federal censorship. Ultimately, Arbuckle was acquitted, but despite this, his career was ruined. Hardly anyone wanted to be openly associated with him when some degree of doubt still lingered over his innocence. Some in the industry said that he was a sacrificial lamb of sorts so that the industry could recover from all of the negative pushback. He made some B-movies under a different name in his later years, but was kept firmly out of the limelight, and his career never recovered from the scandal. Whatever the truth may be, Virginia Rappe is now known almost exclusively for her death, and the effects of it would be widespread and far-reaching in the American movie industry. The exact details and circumstances of Rappe's death definitely warrant a separate video, and I want to update my older video about the case, so I think I'll save the full story for another day. Now, let's take a step away from Hollywood. While this next death might not have been sensational or involved in any scandal, it involved one of the most beloved figures of the day. Enrico Caruso had been one of the earliest stars of recorded music, being one of the most renowned and well-known opera singers of his time. Originally from Naples, Italy, Caruso had become a sensation, first on the stage, then on record. With little exaggeration, his name was ubiquitous all around the Western world. But in the last part of his life, Caruso was plagued with illness. It started in mid-1919 with persistent migraines. Then, in December 1920, while performing in Samson and Delilah, a pillar from the set fell on him. Less than a week later, he slipped on stage and fell on his side, injuring himself. But the most dramatic incident happened on December 11th. He had just started singing the first notes of his performance when a blood vessel in his throat burst. He hesitated, then continued singing, with blood trickling down his throat, making it difficult to sing. After a short time, his wife, seated close by in one of the wings, noticed that something was wrong and gestured for him to stop the performance. Caruso refused, even though blood was now visible on his mouth. He used his handkerchief and the handkerchiefs of the other performers until they were covered with his own blood. His doctor was brought to the theater, and he too tried to tell Caruso to stop, but once again he refused and ended up finishing the performance. After this episode, Caruso would perform a couple more times. During a Christmas Eve performance, he appeared in pain while performing and was clutching his side. Shortly after his final performance, he fell ill with pleurisy along with pneumonia. Between December 31st, 1920 and March 25th, 1921, Caruso underwent 6 separate surgeries, many of them in order to drain fluid, and his condition became critical in early February 1921. After the 4th surgery on March 1st and a blood transfusion on March 12th, he appeared to be recovering very well, and even appeared in public again. He was taking walks, chatting with friends, and telling jokes again. It seemed like Caruso's stubbornness and motivation to keep going had won. He had said previously, when he was seriously ill in New York, that if he were to die, he would rather die in Italy. But by the time he was able to leave New York in late May 1921, it was looking like he wouldn't be dying anytime soon. But nonetheless, he was brought to Sorrento in southern Italy to convalesce. While things were looking up, he had still not fully recovered, and was certainly in no condition to perform. Sometimes it seemed that Caruso refused to believe that he was sick. In his last interview in the fall of 1921, after the reporter noticed that he was smoking a cigar, Caruso exclaimed, "Of course I smoke. What do you think, that I am sick?" He also briefly demonstrated his singing voice for an informal audience. Caruso was very confident that he would beat his illnesses and make a triumphant return to the stage. But when the pain in his side shot up suddenly less than 2 months into his convalescence, his family had to scramble to find a doctor. One had not been attached to his group. An abscess between his liver and stomach was discovered by the new attending doctor. But Caruso stayed in Sorrento for 3 more days before it became evident that he needed to be taken away to Rome for further treatment. But after arriving in Naples, his condition worsened and he couldn't get to Rome. At this point, his heart had been damaged. Caruso became completely bedridden, and his doctors had to treat him in his hotel room. He struggled to stay lucid and drifted in and out of consciousness. At 5 a.m. on August 2nd, 1921, he reportedly said his last words, "I am not rising up this time. It is over." 4 hours later, he died. His death was mourned all across the world as the passing of a musical legend. It's hard to emphasize enough the ripples that his death caused. The newspapers had covered his health condition extensively when there had been any kind of update. And looking at the coverage in the New York Times on August 3rd shows just how important Caruso was to so many people. 2 of the previous people on this list, Robert Harron and Olive Thomas, had received only average-sized blurbs, but Caruso received full pages in tribute. His widow accused some of the doctors handling his case to be at fault for his worsened condition, and the doctors themselves threw blame at each other. but of course, by that point, it was all too late to make any difference. Hypotheticals have been speculated on in the many years after Caruso's death, and it's generally believed that, under the right circumstances, he could have been saved. But due to bad timing, a slow diagnosis, and other such factors, it had all ended in tragedy. Not long before his death, Caruso had related a story to the reporter in his last interview. I think it's a rather poignant way to end this video. He said, "One night, I dreamed I was dead. It was when my illness was at its height. I seemed to be buried, and strangely enough, could at the same time see my bas-relief carved on the top of my tombstone. It seemed so calm and peaceful, no more suffering. A loud automobile horn in the street below brought me back to life, and I woke up to find Mrs. Caruso looking anxiously into my face. I told her one experience beyond the grave would be sufficient for me for some time, and from that moment I have been improving. It's very agreeable to be dead, but it's a great deal nicer to be alive." I hope you enjoyed the first updated video of this series and thought that it was an improvement over the original. I will definitely be remaking the other old videos as well, though the subjects might be shuffled around a bit, but anyway, look out for those in the near future. I will continue making new installments in this series, but the new one has been taking a bit longer than expected, so sorry about the long gap. Well, anyway, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.